The next panel discussion will be about understanding the economics of water, and it will be moderated by Dr. Pierce Clark. And I will leave it for Dr. Clark to introduce his panelists. And I would really appreciate it if you can do your best to finish at 1:05 or 1 probably, because there is another one before the launch.
Please take your seats. I'm going to stay here. There isn't enough space. Oh, no, there is. There is. They brought another chair. Marvelous. Marvelous. Thank you. So the chairman has just set us a challenge of having a panel in 6 minutes, which we like a challenge, so we're going to go for that. So we're going for short, quick-fire answers as best as you can, please. My name's Piers Clark. I'm a partner at the new Water Investment Fund at Blackstone. And I'm going to ask Adam at the end if we can come towards me. Quick introductions, please.
Executive Director of the Water Services Association of Australia, with the peak industry body for water utilities across the country.
Morris from PUB Singapore, Singapore's National Water Agency.
Ruth Matthews, the Executive Director of the Water Footprint Network.
Eva Ramos, Director of Environmental Analysis and Economics of the Environment Agency, who is the entity in charge of regulating groundwater in the Emirate.
Søren Vilsøy, International Water Director at Rambo, and also Vice President of the Danish Water Supply Association.
So what we have in front of us is a very international panel with expertise from all around the world. So my first question is water priced correctly? Søren, short, sharp answers, please. Is water the right price?
Well, in most regions in the world, I would say no. In Denmark, the water price is extremely high. It's like 25 to 35 dirham per cubic meter, and there's absolutely no subsidy. Instead of it, it's like 50% tax on top of it. The water consumption in Denmark is likely a fourth of here per capita, and well, the non-revenue water is like 5% or even lower.
Okay. Eva.
No, I think our experience here is that desalinated water, more than 86% in 2011 was paid by the government through subsidies, and groundwater is not charged. 86% is subsidized by the government. And groundwater doesn't have a price, so although it has an economic value, and we can go into this afterwards.
Ruth.
Well, first of all, I would say that we need to even be thinking about it differently than is it priced. Because when we look at the cost of water, it goes far beyond what we're putting into the price. So we need to think about full cost accounting. That's taking in the consideration of where the water comes from, the need for an environment that supports clean water, and also to look at it from the perspective of how much water is being taken from the environment and not returned. So as the Executive Director of the Water Footprint Network, we look at the water footprint as the amount of water consumed, whereas most of our water pricing and measurement is based on the amount of water withdrawn. But since the environment is where the pressure is being put from water use, we need to be looking at the relationship to the water resource itself, and therefore we should be pricing water, measuring water on the water footprint, not on water withdrawal.
Yeah, great answer. Is absolutely, but let's move on. Morris.
Yeah, so in Singapore, we adopt a two-pronged approach to water management. First, increasing our water supply through diversification, and more importantly too, we manage water demand. So in managing water demand, water pricing is key. So in Singapore, water is not subsidized. In fact, we price water to the next drop of water that Singapore uses, which is a combination of recycling of wastewater and desalination. And our water tariff structure is put in place such that the more you use in Singapore, the more you pay. And in Singapore, water pricing, we think is key in order for us to continue to make sure that water is okay for Singapore.
And the Antipodean angle on it all?
I mean, I think we're getting there in Australia. I think part of the National Water Initiative, which Australia's National Water Plan mandates for at least the large utilities that they have full cost recovery on services. That doesn't include externalities though, which is the next challenge. But they do largely. And for instance, Sydney Water charges the long run marginal cost. They've moved away from declining bulk tariffs. So whatever you use, you pay a single price for that supplied water. So we're getting there, but in some of our country areas there's a bit of work to do.
So I'm going to paraphrase a little bit there, and I'll be unfair to you, but essentially I think what we were saying is water certainly in this region is underpriced, it's too heavily subsidized, but there are good examples where we've got the true cost of capital coming through. But actually it isn't just about money, it's about the whole broader aspect of all the things around water, which is, I hope, a view that will be shared by many in the audience. Let's go to somewhere slightly different. Let's talk about water reuse. What's the play that water reuse has got for us going forward? Maurice, can you give us the view from PUB?
I think some of you may know that Singapore has 4 sources of water supply. One is we collect as much rain as possible, but we have land constraint. We got not much land to store the water. Second source of water is we take water from Malaysia, and that's under a political agreement. So for the country's development, we need to look for other sources of water, and water reuse is a big source of water supply for Singapore. We are able to do this because we have put in place the necessary wastewater infrastructure to collect back every drop of used water so that we can recycle. And in Singapore, we call this new water, and it's now already serving more than 30% of our daily water demand. So new water or wastewater recycling will continue to be Singapore's major source of water supply moving forward.
I love the branding. It's all about new water, how it feels for people. Eva, can I invite you to comment on this as well around reuse and take us into some of the groundwater stuff that you've done?
Well, before that, I would like to say something, is that I mentioned data from 2011, and I think in 2015 things will start to change because the Regulation and Supervision Bureau and ADWEA have just announced a new tariff for desalinated water. And I think most of the effort will be coming from government entities because they are experiencing the biggest change in price. So I think that the government has realized that the situation is not sustainable and is finding different ways to do this. One, through better incentives to price. Also, there are different government entities like ADEFCA and the Abu Dhabi Farmers Center and EAD that are looking into ways of using groundwater more efficiently. And one of the exercises that we are doing now in the Environment Agency is to produce an economic evaluation of groundwater, because we realize that although it's not priced, it has a value. So it's been a process that we started last year, and we hope by the beginning of this year to have a better idea of which is the price or the economic value of groundwater, based not only on its extractive uses, such as in agriculture. Maybe you know that more than 70% of the water here is used by agriculture, even when agriculture only produces, I think, 2% of GDP and 15% of the food supply of the country. So what we are trying is also to expand the perspective on the economic value of water, to introduce also its environmental, if not use value, in terms of how it protects through different, the environment.
Which brings us neatly back to the area you were at, Ruth, around the broader aspects. Is there a comment you'd like to make there?
Yes, thank you. I think tying these two together, the reuse and the groundwater use, with the water footprint, with water use, we need to be thinking about both the water quantity and the water quality. What we see with reuse is that there needs to be an improvement of water quality and consideration about how pollution is put into water for reuse to really work well. And so that brings together the quantity and quality aspects. The other thing to consider is if water is taken from groundwater and used and not returned to that groundwater aquifer, which is most often the case, then whatever is withdrawn from that aquifer is in fact the full blue water footprint. And so if you are taking that water and using it once and discharging it somewhere, you're making very little use of that pressure that you're putting on that groundwater. So it's very important in the case of groundwater, even more so than in the case of surface water, to implement reuse to make sure that the pressure on that groundwater resource is limited to the extent possible, and that the use of the water is multiple times and therefore of more value.
Excellent. I can see that you're keen to ask, to respond, but I'm afraid we are out of time. So I am now, and I'd invite anyone in the audience who wishes to engage with either myself or any of the panelists, please send an email in and we will do our best to respond back to you. But in the interests of keeping this session on track, I'm going to just ask one quick fire question. I'm going to start with you, Soren, and if we can run down. So it is, what's keeping you awake when you think about water and the economics of water? What's the one thing you'd like to change or see addressed?
Well, basically the sustainability of the water and also the cost effectiveness of water. I really agree that you should use TSE for as much purposes as you can, but still it has to be cost effective. Likewise with groundwater, you have to consider when to use it and where to use it in the best way. And I'll give an example. In Denmark, we use only groundwater for drinking water. We had not that big knowledge on how the water resources were, so there was a sort of special tax on water consumption corresponding to like 2 € per cubic meter. And for that money, we collected and made investigations on all groundwater resources in Denmark, which now coming up, well, we have a 3D picture of the groundwater or the water resources in whole Denmark, more or less the size of the Emirates.
Excellent. And my iPad has just come to life, and I've suddenly got downloaded about a dozen questions, so I am going to quickly pick off some, but I need short, sharp answers. So, what can be better done to improve groundwater use here in the UAE, Eva?
I think to start using the shadow price of groundwater in all the economic analysis so that we compare it with other sources of water, the price is not zero. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you. I think this question is good for you. So it's come in from Mohammed, inshallah, from Ratana Hotels. Hotels have a very high water consumption and management have the least control on guest behavior. What's your suggestion? Brilliant question.
Yeah, and it is true that you can't control the client, the customer's behavior. But what I want to point out is I travel all over the world, and almost every hotel has the little card by the bed that says if you don't want me to change your sheets, to put it on the bed, or if you don't want to change the towels, to hang them up. And yet I have been in only 1 or 2 hotels that actually obey that, except in UAE, where it's actually an opt-in as opposed to an opt-out. You have to ask for the change. And this is the way I think hotels can really make a difference, is that they put the pressure on the customer to choose to be less considerate as opposed to choose to be considerate.
Excellent. I've got another question for you. This is great. You make my life so easy sending me the questions. Morris, so the population in the UAE are used to living at a high standard of living, exactly as they are in Singapore, actually. So don't you think that most people can afford water at high prices, and therefore this whole idea of reducing water consumption is going to compromise the life that people want to live? Any comment on the experiences you've got in Singapore?
I think for Singapore, from the very start when we gained independence, the country itself, the people recognize that water is an issue of survival. So that sort of built up the need for everyone to play their part. And of course, PUB now has focused on the programs that continues to build this ownership of water resource in the people. One of the big programs is what we call the Active, Beautiful, Clean program, where we open up all our water bodies, reservoirs, canals, build them up to places where Singaporeans can go and have activities. And in so doing, we hope that they build this relationship with water. So in Singapore, that's the situation.
Thank you. And Adam, the last question for this panel. So again, a question from the audience, in that we talk about water being underpriced, but in most industries, in most countries, industry is subsidized compared to domestic usage. Is that fair, and how should we be managing this?
Oh, geez, that's loaded. It isn't fair, I guess, on the face of it, but I think as you move through the sort of water pricing story, then gradually those subsidies should shift and change. And so everybody, whatever you're using water for, you're being charged the right rate. I mean, that's ostensibly what you should be doing. But can I go back to one question before from the hotels? By far and away, the biggest water efficiency lever that we've found in Australia for hotels is water efficient shower heads. Clearly, that is the number one water efficient.
Everyone likes to sit in their hotel and let the water just run.
Nobody likes to stand under a dribble.
No.
But there's some great shower heads out there at the minute, and they can deliver.
So, if we could thank the panel in the usual way. If anyone's got any follow-on questions, we'll deal with them by email. Thank you.